Build Science 301. You ready?
I am ready.
Let's get going.
All right. So we are on officially to 301, the details. All right. So we're going to show you the detail. We're going to talk about the challenge of that detail. And then we're going to talk about a solution. And then we're going to show you some photos and drawings of other solutions that are tied into that. So without further ado, slab on grade. Let's take a look at them. Turn down slab on the right, 3-piece on the left. Pretty standard stuff. But these are the challenges, right? These are the questions you should ask before you get to doing the solutions. What do I need that detail to do? Control layers, water management. You know, we have some exterior water maybe we have to worry about there. Slab on grade's one of the beauties of it. In this case, it's actually slab above grade, right?
That's a great point.
Water really isn't too big of an issue here, but air management, right? We have concrete slab, wood frame going down, very susceptible detail there for air leakage. Vapor, we always have moisture migration coming up through the slab, right? And of course, thermal management. Probably one of the horror stories of this detail is the fact that the thermal break that's happening there.
About in Austin, Texas, Steve, when I look at my Manual J reports, if we have an uninsulated slab, it's something like 40% of the house's heat load is lost through an uninsulated slab.
Yeah.
So if you look at your Manual J's for this general climate zone 2, let's say, a massive amount of heat loss through that slab. It's crazy.
Yeah, and when you look at the turn down slab, pretty much, you know, the same thing, but the issue with the turn down slab, because it's a monolithic pour, it poses different challenges in the executable range, right? Because all that concrete wants to get poured at once. So let's look at a couple solutions here. All right, slab on grade, pretty standard. Run some insulation under the slab, turn the corner. That perimeter at the slab is probably one of the most important pieces of insulation in the house with a slab on grade. We got rid of the thermal break. You can see that little dashed line in there. That's some kind of vapor barrier or stego. If you're not familiar with them, I'm sure they're at the show here.
They are.
Go check them out, right? Keep that moisture from coming up. Air leakage, we have my 2 little beads of sealant there with sill sealer, but we can also tape the outside, right? We solved the challenges. Once we knew what the problems were, the solution is pretty easy, right? And when you look at something and you say, hey, Steve, I don't even know why you're showing us that. It looks pretty easy. Well, that's the goal, right? Because if it looks that damn easy, then it's probably pretty damn easy to build, right? One of the most important words in building science is continuity, right? So if I design the house properly and do that turn down slab detail, chances are I am doing a full coverage of pretty much the floor plan with insulation without any thermal break. It's literally a floating floor, right? So it works really, really well.
Works really well.
Let's look at some other options, right? Frame over. These are all, you know, like I said, been doing this a long time. Matt and I shared a bunch of photos, but pulling some of these out that are just different generations, different variations, maybe a few steps outside of the box. Remember why we're here, right? So this is what I called the frame over. We actually framed a 2x floor over. Notice we had the HVAC guy come in and he laid out his ductwork on the slab, and then the framers came in, put insulation on top of the slab, and we gave those troughs for the HVAC guy. This was a slab on grade addition to a house.
Fascinating.
And then we ran all of the ductwork, then we insulated in between the ductwork, but the ductwork is insulated underneath against the ground where the delta's much tighter, and very successful project.
So it was 8 inches between concrete and top of hardwoods, let's say?
Pretty much.
Something like that?
Pretty much.
Oh, that's wild. How cool.
First passive house I ever did. This was a frame over floor. And I don't have a lot of times I have the wall section here, but you know, it's interesting in our industry, especially when you're doing, this was the very first passive house I did, 2009 vintage. The passive house guy, this was his first house ever calculating. So there were a lot of, fear was at a very high level here. And my passive house guy was like, his fear level was high walking in the door, never mind after the conversation. But anyways, every time I met Mike, it seemed like, Steve, you know, I reran that last night. We got to add 2 more inches to the insulation, or to the foundation. And then we got to the point where I looked at him and said, Mike, you know, we're up to 8 inches of mechanically fastened insulation on the outside of the foundation wall. I said, that's ludicrous. I can't bring that to a builder. It's not executable, right? And that's one of the rules of details. We have to make sure that this is executable. So all I did was I took the wall section and I rotated it 90 degrees. Now, I would love to be able to take credit for that, but Joe did the same thing to me about 8 years before I did it to Mike. We were looking at a detail and Joe just said, yeah, you got to draw this, but we're going to make it a floor. I'm like, but Joe, that's a wall. And he just went, now it's a floor. So we turned it. We framed a floor, basically framed a wall on top of it. And then the picture on the right, we filled it with something like R80 of cellulose. And we billowed it, and then we put the Advantech down, screwed it down. Now, would I do that again? No. R80, yeah, it's ludicrous. But remember, we were still learning about passive house too. So things were pretty crazy. Our, 80 floor systems, our 60, 70 wall systems, our 100 roof systems. But anyways, it works. House is still there. Zero energy, PV panels, working like a dream. All right. This is that 3-piece slab, 4 inches of XPS insulation, floating floor, finished floor on top of it, right? It's no different really than the wall assembly on the left-hand side. Now I know exactly what y'all are thinking. What if I want part of my floor to be wood and part of it to be concrete? How do we solve for that? Not a problem. We'll stop the concrete, we'll drop it down, we'll do a little sleeper system there, we put it all on top of the foam. Just another solution.
It's a cool detail.
There's your 4 inches type 9 EPS, right down on the concrete, 2 layers of Advantech floating on top of it. And of course, here's that detail fully with the 2-inch shelf on the side and the executable. Now, the beauty of that too is they actually changed it a little out in the field. They actually sat that zip R right down on it. One of the things about cutting sections is you have to select where you're going to cut the section. So sometimes they pose a little bit of a mystery. So this is one of those mystery details. You look at it and say, are you really supporting that deck pan on the insulation? The answer is no. There's a steel beam beyond, and there's a steel beam in the foreground that the steel pan is being picked up by. The detail's intent was to show the continuity of the rigid insulation around that deck pan. This is a house. There's also a passive house in southern Maine, and the homeowners wanted a slab for their first floor, but they didn't want to forfeit the basement. But here's the detail actually showing that. And you can see that rigid insulation coming up around the edges there, and then the pan there, and that's the outer wall of the double wall that we would have a 2x4 wall that would then get framed on top of the slab once it gets poured.
And then it's finished concrete as the finished floor.
And then it's finished concrete as the floor.
That's really cool.
So these are details, ICF house with our slab insulation on top, wood on top. So this one actually, for the amount of insulation here, believe it or not, it's just outside of Phoenix. Right? Even though it looks like it should be in Minnesota or Vancouver. But we always think of insulation as a battle against heat. We never think of insulation as a battle against cooling, right? Now, cooling doesn't move. I'm not suggesting that. But when you're here in Austin and you've paid for a nice 70-degree room or 72-degree room in your family room, and it's 101 outside, guess what's happening? Heat is trying to move across that assembly and warm that family room, right? Insulation, people, is not about heat or cooling. It's about energy transfer. It moves from hot to cold. That's why we call it R value, resistance. Understanding how all the little pieces get put together here, right? We're resisting heat transfer. So does it mean that we shouldn't put insulation? Hey, it's Phoenix. We don't need a lot of insulation. It's always hot here. But you buy energy. And the whole purpose of energy is to battle energy transfer, whether it's from the outside in or inside out, doesn't matter. Let's talk about basements and crawl spaces. Down the bottom, real simple detail. Slab coming into the wall. The challenge is, right, we got water coming up, we got the cold joint, potentially water going through, water trying to get in the foundation system. We got vapor transfer across the foundation wall, across the slab, moisture migration happening there, looking for a nice cold surface to change from vapor to liquid, right? Thermal management, yeah, whole bunch of cold spots in that detail. How do we solve it? The solution looks very similar to the slab on grade detail as far as the slab goes. Perimeter insulation turns up the wall, right? One of the things to note is the insulation on the wall, right? Remember, we have a vapor profile across that foundation wall that we probably should be a little concerned with, right? Where does the moisture come from? It comes from the outside. So how do we deal with that? Well, first of all, in any moisture problem, we get rid of the water as much as we can. Outside of the wall, in this case here, we have a drainage mat, 60 mil waterproofing system that goes down over the slab or over the footing. Notice there's a little fillet drawing in there. In this particular case, we actually used, there's a company that makes a little bentonite. It's actually a little square cube that you can put in there, and when the water hits it, it swells and basically seals that joint. But for those of you familiar with Polyguard or not familiar with Polyguard, they're at the show here, go check out their blue barrier because they designed a product as part of their system for exactly that situation.
Yeah, Polyguard makes some bomber 60 mil peel and sticks too.
And then on the inside, from a thermal perspective, we talked about the insulation underneath, the insulation going up the wall. We probably want a lower level of permeance on that insulation. We don't want that moisture free flowing into that wall. If we do, we want to make sure that that insulation is an unfaced air permeable insulation with the drywall. Drywall is a really good air barrier, but it's pretty much vapor open. I forget what I think it's like 300 perms or something something. It's like drywall, vapor goes right through it. So some of the details. So in this one here, we actually used Formadrain. This is the only project that we ever did. For those of you not familiar, Formadrain is a square tubular drainage structure that you put in to form the footing, but then you leave in place.
Oh, that's cool.
And it basically becomes your footing drain inside and out. So that's what those rectangular channels are. But yeah, not a whole lot of magic. Insulation, breaking that slab from the ground, vapor barrier there, moisture profile. On the outside, we have our drainage mat. Goes out over the Formadrain. Formadrain is there. The other beauty about Formadrain is not only is it a water management system, but you can plug it into a radon vent and use it as your perimeter radon evacuation system. So works quite well in that regard. Just a quick picture. Thing to note in the photo, notice the insulation goes over the footing, not up to the footing, right? So you want to make sure you're properly planning for that. And foundations don't have to be necessarily cast in place. This project here, we worked with Superior Wall. I don't know if any of you used them, but they do blanket the country. It's a prefabricated system. The concrete, I believe, is a 7,000 pound concrete. For those of you not aware of it, one of the beauties of that high strength concrete is that the stronger you make concrete, the more water resistant it becomes. 2.5 days, they set something like 3,500 square foot for the house and probably another 1,400 square foot for the garage in 2.5 days. And that's setting all the stone, preparing it, leveling it out, and then setting the walls. And then this is just pretty typical. We bring insulation up to the footing, we bring the top layer over the footing, and we maintain continuity. And I get some of these are simple, but that's our goal, right? Simple means easy to execute. Our good friends at Polyguard, right? Total flow, lower
Arroyo
section.
drain.
Yeah, they have their waterproofing system, their blue barrier, the spray-on adhesive, the drainage mat with mesh, so total system. This is just a closed cell insulation job, Stego over the top.
I first saw that detail on a Wade Paquin job years ago. Had never seen it before. It looks like a bathtub sprayed in there. And I'm sure it's obvious, but just to say it anyways, it's going up the wall by 1 foot or 2 so that when the slab gets poured, it's making a thermal break at the edge of the slab. And then later, the spray foam contractor, after the basement walls are framed, will come back and connect the top spray foam to the bottom spray foam. Just makes everything really easy. It's a nice detail.
Yeah. This is a retrofit. I have a few of these in here. This was a case in New England. We have a lot of old homes. This was probably about a 175-year-old home.
Wow.
Fieldstone basement that was pretty much water open, right? When it rained, there was a river that went through the basement. We dug it out, cracked the slab, moved it out. What you're seeing there is the upper piece is a piece of plastic that folds down under the slab. And it's a fluted piece of plastic. I wrote an article for Fine Home Building. I'm sure I can find it for you, but you can Google them, retrofitting basement water management. And it's this cross-laminated shower curtain, basically, that then tucks in behind it. So we didn't change the dynamic of the wall. The wall is still water open. We just redirected
really
water.
smart.
Remember, it's water management. It's not water stop, it's not water, halting. It's water management. It's okay. Get rid of the water, make it somebody else's problem. Let them figure it out. Send it down the road. Let's talk a little bit about piers and ICFs. All right, piers. Slightly different game plan. Takes a bunch of problems out of the picture, but adds a few new ones. Like water management pretty much ceases to exist except for the rainfall that's going to come down the wall.
Yeah, that's a big benefit of a pier foundation.
Right.
Assuming it's all open underneath and can get through.
But it's also like sticking your hand out the window while you're driving in February in Minnesota, right? And saying, let's stay warm, all right? So we have to solve for that. So let's talk about it. Pier foundations, yeah. Pretty much we've taken most of the problems of the slab and just literally elevated them, right? But we've exposed that bottom side, right? ICFs, same thing. They solve a lot, but we still have a lot of the problems. We have waterproof water issues. We have vapor profile issues. Certainly it's going to slow it down a little with the concrete. The thermal issues, somewhat solved by the block, but I wouldn't necessarily say that those thermal issues are exactly what's touted sometimes. Moving on. Now, the picture on the left, right? One of the things to realize, if I take that illustration and rotate it 90 degrees, the wall and the floor are exactly the same. Exterior insulation, framing component, cavity filled with insulation, right? The only difference is we label it as the floor, we label it as the wall, but the other part of the floor is comfort now becomes part of the equation because I walk on it. Now, not many people I know of walk along their house dragging their hand on the wall to say, oh my God, it's cold up here, right? But you can't help but walk on a floor and say, wow, my little toes are feeling a little chill this morning in February. So we have a comfort issue there. Now, we do have the benefit of a floor frame being 16 inches here, so we get a whole lot of insulation by virtue of it being a floor frame. But that floor is exactly the same challenge as the wall. And this one here, when you're talking of solutions, problems, is an elevated house on piers, but I still think we're at like 0.30 or something on airtightness, which was pretty incredible given that, we have that whole exposed slab to the outside. When I go back and I look at that, notice the insulation job on that floor is 2 parts, right? There's the cavity insulation, that's gonna take care of a whole bunch. But notice there's a zip R9 panel on the bottom. The reason for that is because you ask the question of, okay, we fill the cavity, do we have any thermal breaks across that system? Yeah, every time there's a truss. How do we battle that? We need to install insulation somewhere between the outside and the inside that breaks that truss from contact. So we put the zip R9. Consequently, that's exactly what's on the wall. And there's a picture from the belly of the beast, right? Zip R9. It works on the wall. It's in a very effective air barrier there, very effective weather resistive barrier. What would cause me to question it to just turn the corner and use it as the same thing in the belly?
Really smart. Great use of materials and a great air barrier that is a normal product that we can get at any lumber yard nearby us.
Yeah.
All right, Steve, let's keep going on ICF.
ICF, insulated concrete forms. This is a project for those of you that do follow along. You'll recognize this as the Riverside project. So you can see here, tough and dry system. It's a rigid fiberglass on the outside of a 60 mil waterproofing, gets rolled on to the ICF. Why rigid fiberglass? Well, rigid fiberglass has oriented strands. Oriented strands means if I put water in it, they fall to gravity. So they go down to the perimeter drain, they disappear. So it's also a protection board, right? It's there to provide the drainage medium, but it's also there that if we drop a few rocks in, we're not damaging that ICF or damaging that waterproofing. Let's talk Glavel. Glavel, it's a fully recycled product. It's manufactured, I think it's up in Burlington, Vermont. Carries an R value of 1.7 per inch, but it's a drainage medium too. So you can put it under slab and get the insulation value. In this particular case, I think we used about 16 inches of it. So it came out to about R27 under slab. So it was a pretty, we had to backfill quite a bit too. So it was a good solution for that.
Good backfill medium.
Yeah.
It feels like a real light, like a lava rock or a charcoal briquette. Super weirdly lightweight. And as you stack it, it's got good drainage, right? Because there's it's big rocks, not small dust. So water, if it got in there, would easily be able to drain. And especially important on a site like this that's real close to a river.
ICCF. It works just like ICF, but it's 100% recycled. They take all of the trash EPS, grind it up, mix it, reconstitute it into an ICF block.
That's cool.
Now, the real question I have for you, I put 2 photos up here. One, you can see a very meticulously laid vapor barrier, but we have a section of the basement where I chose not to put a vapor barrier. Why would I do that? It's a root cellar. We actually do a lot of projects that are homestead type projects where people have their fruit trees, nut trees, gardens, and we do a lot of root cellars. And in a root cellar, the vapor profile is such that we want that moisture to come into the room, right? We want that 55-degree ground temperature to be the temperature in the room so we can store vegetables and such.
Fascinating.
Very cool stuff. One of the things about this system here that we did was we did a drop-in floor frame system. So the whole floor frame is thermally inside that condition space.
That's smart.
And we just have that top cord bearing truss going out. And what that does is it takes our 28 inches delta from subfloor to grade and reduces it down to about, maybe about 10 or 12 inches. So it's one step.
That top hang makes a lot of sense as I look at that, because by dropping that truss down with a top hang, and I don't know what those Simpson top hangers cost, but they're not as much as doing closed cell in that band joist area, I can tell you that for sure. And now it's also perfectly air sealed there. And again, there's really no additional insulation needed. That's pretty smart.
Talk a little exterior wall. Yeah, we don't stop here. 2x4 or 6 half-inch sheathing, or 1.5 inch insulating sheathing. All right, let's look at the challenges. There's a whole bunch there. We have the stuff from the concrete. We have stuff at the mud sill area. We have stuff at the band joist area like you just talked about. And then certainly above grade wall. You know, that water table area, man, there is a lot happening there. And if you understand, if we did a full section of the house, this is an area that has some of the highest negative pressure on the house, right? The house is basically sucking on the outside, and it's trying to get stuff in. So let's look at it. And in fact, our standard detail is to put 4 inches of closed cell in there. And you know, whether you're an advocate of foam or not, you know, our position in our office is always the right material for the right job. And it's hard to argue that closed cell isn't the right material for that location. It's just a challenge. But when we look at these details, they're pretty much the same detail except for the insulating sheathing on the outside. The picture that we have up there now, this is Texas, folks. Zip R6 out there, you know, again, it's about energy transfer. It's not that, hey, it's nice and warm in Texas all the time. We don't really need the same insulation levels that you need up in Minnesota or up in Boston. It's just simply not true. Now, there's slightly a different level of heat transfer. That's why we have Zip R6 here. But understand, it's about that energy transfer if you need to walk out of here with something. This is that house where we did the superior wall. So as an architect, some of the most feared words that I hear quite often is, Steve, I think we're going to GC this ourselves.
That's every builder's worst nightmare.
Yeah.
When people ask me, hey, what do you think about me GCing my own house? Of course, I always say, that's a really bad idea. Hire a professional like us in the room. Yep. But I have seen some jobs that have gone incredibly well by smart people, but the big key was that they were there. Yeah. You cannot run a job as a builder or as a somebody building their own house and not be on site.
Yeah. And you can see here, they did all of the floor system, about, I don't know, it's probably just under 3,300 square feet of floor system. And they installed it in less than 3.5 hours, right? Floor framing, floor sheathing, everything, nailed off, done, gone. Anyways, how about a little bit of a detail with pocket headers? One of my favorite details.
That's some good looking advanced framing right there, Steve. That looks nice. 24
inch on center, Zip R9, pocket header. We tune the headers so that we're not just filling it with, overstructure. So the pocket header basically is, we start with the header on the outside, 1-ply, 2-ply, and in some cases we have to move to a 3-ply. Remember, something has to be the worst part of the house, right? So occasionally that does happen. But in this case here, you can see that's a 2-ply LVL, about a 7-foot opening, and we still have insulation. But when you talk about executable, think about this detail. The insulator does what the insulator does when the insulator does it. When we do a set of drawings, we actually have a header schedule. Probably has 25 different headers, A, B, C, D, all the way to J or K, L, whatever. And then when we do our framing plans, and we usually draw, most of the time we draw our framing plans, not all the time, and then we just send them out for the engineer to mark up. But at every opening, it'll say header A, B, C, or D. So header A is a single ply 9.5-inch LVL, and we tuck it to the top plate. So in a 9'1" wall, our head height is 7'11" to the opening. And on an 8'1" wall, it's at 6'11". So then we can determine, how we set our windows, et cetera, to that. But we always just build that ply out. So header A might be a single 9.5" to the outside. Header B is 2 9.5 inches. Header C is 3. Understanding planning and execution. Yeah. So when I worked at Building Science Corporation, a lot of our time we spent drawing elevations and trying to convince people into advanced framing and, 2-stud corners. And remember, this is, given my age, this is late 90s where I'm doing these drawings for the Builder's Guide and stuff. But, it really helped me as a young architect. You can imagine it put me kind of in framing mode where I had to step out of the corner 2 feet and count for the wall that comes into that, perpendicular on the other side. But it helped me understand things. But It also helps me understand when you look at that drawing, there's basically 3 components to the wall. And when you talk to builders, especially builders that like to talk about their houses, right? The first thing that they reference usually is the insulation value of center of cavity. Oh, Steve, you don't understand. We build R32 walls. Okay, let's do the math for a second. R32 center of cavity, 65% of the wall. 20% of that house is plus or minus is probably window. Domestically, those are probably R3 to R5. If we go to a European tilt turn, we can progress up to maybe R7.6 for 20% of the wall. For 15 to 18% of the wall, we have the opaque area that is the framing member that you see here. So if we gang those all up, it accounts for 15 to 18%. If we normalize those R values across those 3 situations, you'll come to realize R32 with a domestic R3 window is probably somewhere around R14 for a whole wall R value, right? It's not R32. It's R32 in the center of cavity, but that only exists for 65% of the time, right? So just a little education. You want to sit across the table from your clients, and when they talk about, hey, how are we going to do this? You throw that at them, and you're like, damn. Homeowners will be like, this builder knows this stuff. This is the guy I want building my house, right? Quick shot. This one here is zip with 2 inches of polyiso on the outside, 0 energy home. Heating degree days at this house, 6,800 heating degree days. Yeah, it's literally at the top of the hill in a very cold place. And the house is heating system. While we do have 2 mini splits, we just put a major addition on it, and we still kept the 2 mini splits, we just spread them a little farther apart. 0 energy, I mentioned that. But also, he has a Reyes stove in there. 2 armloads of wood gets this house through a winter day.
That's very cool.
This is a timber moment frame. Nor America was the one that cut this. You've been to this. This is the barn with Brian.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
And
Such
pretty
a cool
exciting project. Homeowner, it was a 3-building project. We did a large house, a pool house, and the husband, it initialized as the husband wanted a barn for his toys. But the challenge here, you could see, we had some large members there, right? Basically 12 inches by almost 18-inch moment frame. It's a wood moment frame with steel plates inside, 2x4 wall, and we did exterior insulation. Now we didn't do high levels because we call it kind of semi-conditioned. It's still probably 65 plus inside, and we have solar on it, so it's a total 0 energy product. We actually pipe electricity back to the main residence and pool house from the barn. But you can see here the plan detail and then the section detail. You can see on the right side there, insulated slab, insulated on the outside. We do have some areas that were a little bit of a challenge, but this moment frame was a real challenging system to pull together. And you can see that's the inside of the barn there with that wooden moment frame. And
that picture doesn't do it justice. It's gorgeous. We call that a barnuminium down here in Texas.
It's a barnuminium. Hey, this is a simple challenge. Remember, garage is outside. When it comes to air tightness, you know, if you've heard me speak on control layers, air tightness is pretty simple. There's no gray area. I'm either outside of the building or I'm inside. There's no halfway in air leakage, right? The garage is outside. If the garage is outside, and in this case, zip R, or the polyiso with the tape joints is my air barrier, then that wants to go through, and then I frame the garage interior wall to that.
One of the things that always gets me a little bit jazzed about the framing stage is how do we stagger things correctly so that the framing works and I've got my full zip sheathing on the outside of the building, and then whatever it is, whether it's porches, whether it's garages, whatever, then that gets bolted through the air barrier so that we don't penetrate that air barrier or as little as possible in any ways with beams or lumber or whatever.
Onward and upward. Staggered stud, double wall construction, right? Challenges, pretty much the same. water management, air management through the framing system. The only difference here is it's a staggered stud wall on a singular plate, or it's a double wall, 2 walls. Solution looks very, very similar. Now, the thing you want to worry about, though, is you want to make sure that if you're not going to have total control of that condensing surface, we really want to be vapor open to the outside, right? So the vapor profile and insulation really play kind of a tandem role, buddy-buddy system, to ensure that we're either vapor open across the wall in the vapor profile, or I have insulation adequate enough to keep the vapor in the vapor state and not allow it to condense on a cold surface, right? And that's true for the double stud wall. I mean, these are pretty much the same wall, just expanded from 7¼ inches to 11 or 12 inches. And there you can see the 2x8 plate with a 2x4, staggered 24 inches, staggered across outside and inside. So basically the studs are 12 inches on center, just they change inside, outside. Double wall, we do this a lot in passive houses. The beauty of it is you get to move that inner wall in and out depending on what we need to solve for the passive house equation. So we can use it as a trade-off.
R42 dense pack, that's serious.
It's a serious business out there. So, and there you can see the double wall in effect, basically building 2 walls. Now the beauty of it, the picture on the right, what you can see there is, notice we have some cross bracing. So the engineer said, you know, we have this double wall, we should take advantage of it. We'll use 2x4s to help brace that outer wall. This one's literally on the ocean too. And we can brace that exterior wall and bump up our shear numbers by screwing 2x4s to the inside of the wall.
Smart. And then the drywall's up because the interior walls are not framed, I'm assuming?
The interior walls aren't framed, and that was part of our air barrier.
Air barrier, yeah.
So just so you know, I talked earlier about this house, zip green box. We did the drywall on the lid, concrete slab. We hit 0.16 ACH 50 on the house.
Wow.
So any of you that are concerned about zip not making the grade or really isn't an airtight system, I don't know what to tell you, but 0.16 speaks a lot.
That's tight.
To their success. It also speaks to, we didn't cover any of the field nails. And I know a lot of people are worried about, oh, what if water gets in there? Well, water, you need a hole, you need water, you also need a pressure difference. So if I'm hitting 0.16, understand I don't have the pressure difference. If I don't have all 3, I don't have a leak. So timber framed house, this one also going for passive house. These details are, it was a hard house to draw and understand, but what you're looking at on the left, those are 2 section elevations, gusset plates for an exterior 2x4 wall to be hung outside of the timber frame. And you'll see it a little clearer in the photo here on the top left. So timber frame with a 2x4 wall, 2x4 wall is sheathed, and then we build a wall on the outside of it. Perfect wall and Larson truss. It's nothing more than protecting our air barrier and moving that vapor profile into the center of the wall so that the wall can either dry through or dry in both directions. But it's always protected. 800 square foot passive house. We didn't want to make a really super thick wall because we only had 800 square feet we were restricted to. So I told Farley, it's easy. We'll just figure out a way to insulate outside of the foundation wall. So we hung a 14-inch floor truss on the outside of the wall.
Pretty cool.
You can see all the challenges here, but there you have the details. The section's quite impressive. Like I said, 14-inch floor trusses hung on the outside of the wall. It's probably the most R-value rigorous wall we've ever done. I think it was like 76 or something like that by the time we were done.
That's wild.
But again, understand, this was passive house in its infancy where you got penalized to be a small house. They've certainly changed the way they calculate it, and we would never have to do this again. But we had to do this to meet the restrictions there. And there you have it. That's what it looks like. 14-inch trusses, literally. And Farley and his other guy, they put all of them up in one day. And this is where it stemmed from. This is actually a remodeling project that I did with another builder in the Boston area where he had really nice details, nice rosettes, window trim, wood windows. And he said, I want to do a zero energy house, but I don't want to take any of that stuff off. Is there a way we can do it from the outside? I said, sure, we'll just pad out a wall, we'll fur it out, we'll turn it into a Yeti cooler, and we'll get some double glazed windows and we'll put those on the outside of your single glazed windows and call it a, double glazed storm window assembly. And that's exactly what we did, right? Notice that all of the blocks there, they're all thermally broken. The wall is plumbed off the XPS blocks, and then we foam everything in place. And he's taken this house to zero energy, and the air tightness has gone from, like 30 plus air changes to passive house levels. So, vented roof, pretty simple one, right? Put a vent in, goes up, takes air up into the roof, moisture migrates through the roof assembly, moisture goes out the ridge vent, right? Pretty basic physics, right? There's their challenges. We want to make sure we have nice, adequate overhangs for water management purposes. The solution, pretty simple. The one thing that we want to be concerned with is, notice that we have those blocks. They keep the rafters from rotating, but also notice we don't allow any air to go into our air permeable insulation. The only air that's allowed into that attic system, in fact, goes up through the chute, the ventilation chute. Right? So it's totally controlled system. We get zero wind washing is the effect when air goes up and cuts into our insulation and makes it cold at the perimeter. All right? When you have tall walls and you want to protect them, you put big overhangs.
Yeah, you do.
So that's a 66-inch overhang over the top of that wall. One of the things about vented roof assemblies, as an architect, a lot of people think, oh, it just has to be this 2-inch, metal screen strip down the middle. Doesn't have to be. We're architects. We're supposed to make things look pretty and perform well. That's what we do, right? One of my sayings, you've heard it, should perform as good as it looks, right? Shouldn't only be about looks and forget about performance. Shouldn't only be about performance and forget about aesthetics. It's a marriage between the two. Right? And whether it's a closed box soffit like the one on the left or a totally open tail system like the one on the right, both of these are fully vented roof systems.
Those look great.
The one on the right, you can see that black line just above the top of the wall. That's a core vent that's just tucked behind a shadow block, right, to vent that roof. We do passive houses. Some of them have slabs. They don't have a basement, but we still have a lot of stuff. Heating, cooling equipment, and because we don't have a basement, we need to find places to put stuff. So I do what it's called a manufactured attic. So we actually get the trusses made, so there's a slight attic in there. We take that attic and we air seal along the contour of that attic, so now we can put stuff up there and we can deliver our heating and cooling system to every room on the second floor. We can deliver all of our ERV ports to every room on that section, right? It's called design. And then if you're looking for the detail, that's what the detail looks like. But basically understand that that air barrier is basically contouring that manufactured attic.
That was really smart.
And then you can see here, this is the example of the construction. What's interesting is this particular builder said, hey, instead of using that membrane, can we just line that with zip? It's an air barrier on the outside. He made a valid point, right? And his framers can do it. He's like, my framers can do it. They can do it really fast. Can we let them just do it? I said, sure. So we did the whole belly of that roof truss in zip. And this house, it's a certified passive house. We're in the 0.3, 0.4 range, something like that. This is the very first passive house in the country under the prescriptive method, I believe. So, and again, project with Jake. We can make those soffits look nice and pretty, right? We could take mundane ventilation systems and elevate the aesthetics, make it look good. Giving air the right path, right? Making sure we don't have that wind washing effect at the end of the roof. It's vented, but we want to make sure that that air goes up the vent that it should.
It's a little hard to see, but just to make sure y'all can tell in the back, those are black baffles that are giving that ventilation space at the roof line. And then Steve used some closed cell foam to make sure that was nice and air sealed along there and wouldn't get wind washed. And then later, after the drywall is hung, which is the true air barrier, then you're going to blow in some.
Then we'll blow in some insulation and cellulose against it. So there's the detail.
Yep.
Yeah, and we probably have, 22 inches of settled insulation, which is, an R84 ceiling, something along those lines. In this case here, we did use the Siga Myrex for this detail in lieu of the
instead of drywall.
Before the drywall gets installed. And then that's the detail of what happens over the interior partitions. And of course, that's what it looks like under construction. And then we put the 2x4s for a service cavity. As an alternative, we've had builders trace the floor plan in 3/4 inch Advantech, where all the floor or all the wall plates are going to go. And then make the connection with the drywall between them.
That's really smart.
This is Farley's passive house out on the vineyard. Again, we use zip system there. So he put it up. Unvented roofs. You guys do a lot of that down here. Challenges are pretty much the same, right? The house reacts the same. The solution is slightly different, right? In this case here, we have closed cell foam with added insulation. Could be an air permeable insulation. The unvented truss, if you're far enough down south, you can go to an open cell solution. This is a pool house where we did a fully conditioned attic system. Just some other different details. And even when you do nice decorative bays with copper roofs, we still have to adhere to all the lessons. Notice how that Zip R9 traces around that window opening and maintains continuity in our air barrier, right? Volume vented roofs just means cathedralized ceilings, if you will, right? The one on the left, we're using a membrane. One on the right, we're actually using a membrane. This one here, this is one where we're using the membrane down below. So you can see it there. This was the that 800 square foot passive house. We did a membrane along the sloped roof, totally vented attic system. And again, should perform as good as it looks.
Looks great.
Right? Doesn't mean just because we're doing some really good building science, it has to be ugly. Here you go, your favorite topic.
My favorite, Monopoly roof truss system. The first time I've done Monopoly framing with trusses instead of hand cut. And we left some of the soffits open.
Look at that pretty house.
That's my personal house. Monopoly framing, that wall touches the roof sheathing. We can tape that for air tightness. And then we added an over roof detail. And we did 2 different over roof details between my house and the Reisinger build house, but they're both Monopoly framed.
Yeah, and this is Josh's house, Monopoly framed. And the picture on the right shows the added soffit system.
Looks great.
This is an over vented cathedralized roof where we did 2x4s on top of the sheathing and then put the roofing on top of that, right? So it's basically a vented roof that we moved outside of the building.
Yep.
It works extremely well. And I know some of you sit there and say, oh, well, that's 2 layers of sheathing and this and that, but it went really, really fast, right? And this is it done with a trussed roof system. You can see there's the pictures, the vent shaft going up over the insect screen. This was the barn, SIPS panel. Looks pretty cool.
Man, that barn's cool.
Yeah.
I love it.
This is a SIPS panel roof with an over-vented roof assembly. You can see the furring strips in that 3/4 inch airspace.
It's cool.
All right. I think these were the details we did for your house. This was the first passive house retrofit in the country. We did this one probably about 10 years ago. I know. Flattish roofs, this is the end.
Yeah, let's finish up with flat.
Right. So flat roofs, you can either choose to insulate top side or put the insulation inside and handle the vapor profile on the inside of that sheathing. right? Which on the left is what we're doing, right? We sprayed 4 inches of closed cell, impermeable, so moisture always stays in the vapor state, can't penetrate it, can't get to that cold sheathing on the roof, and it basically stays in the vapor format. We got a beautiful Zender system in there. We keep our H nice and comfortable in there, and we're all set. The picture on the right, these people didn't want spray foam in their house, so we put a bunch of insulation topside. It's basically the same roof assembly, except we just moved the insulation above the plywood ceiling or plywood roof sheathing, right? There's the detail there. There it is in action. Another house that we did, in this case here, even though it was a flat roof, we still put low sloping solar on, turned the house into zero energy, and the end.
That is build science 301.
But before you go, please remember, coming here is only the start of the solution. You got to walk out that door, out those doors, whether you take this information or not, take the attitude with you.
Thank you.